Hello, my name is Sean Clark with Venture Unknown. I am here to tell my story about the Helene disaster relief efforts that we ran in Western North Carolina for the month of October. I'm going to read it from this story that I've written and share it with you guys that way. I was able to think about my words a little bit by writing it. So I do apologize for just reading straight off the page here, but I do hope you'll stick around for the story. This happened and Hurricane Helene made landfall on September 26th and came through the southeast region bigger and stronger than I think anybody could have imagined, especially as far inland as the damage was. The massive amount of rain that went into the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains was staggering. No one has seen a flood and some of these rivers get to their level since the flood of 1916. It devastated communities that were anywhere near rivers and creeks. And so before I start reading my story here, I'll just tell you just a little bit of history about what happened to the days leading up, and then I'll take it over from reading. But we were out in the Ozarks. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. My home was also hit to some degree. It snapped a power line out there, and we had power off and everything, but it was only for a couple days, nothing serious. We were out in the Ozarks when the hurricane hit. I can remember sitting around a campfire and we started talking about a hurricane was coming, and really didn't think too big of a deal. We normally don't have to worry about things like that this far inland, and so I didn't feel any emergency to get home. Some of the folks that I was on the ride with did leave a day early because of the storm, and they got home. Luckily, everybody, all those immediate people that I know of, are fine. I personally have not experienced any serious death with anybody close to us or anybody from Venture Unknown that I know of. But God knows lots of areas in the southeast did experience tragedy. So without further ado, I'm going to read my story here. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm okay. Just thought I'd come in and say hi and share my story of my time in Western North Carolina during the Venture Unknown Helene disaster relief efforts. I'm trying to adjust from going 150 miles per hour back to my normal 75 miles per hour, and it has been a little hard. Every day in Western North Carolina felt like a week, yet the day would go by extremely fast. This was an oddity that we all experienced, especially those folks that stayed for longer than a week. It all now seems like a strange dream. I'd like to try and recall that dream if I may. I think it's important to note that I never had too much intention or expectation when I left my house that day. It started from two messages. Stephen reached out to me about Alexander Supertramp, aka Abraham, was displaced and had nowhere to go as his car, cats, and everything he owned was now blocked by a washout road. He had to wade through chest-high water just to escape. The second thing was one of you asked if anyone had checked on old Ray, also known as Red Beast Wagon. That prompted me to get out of my salt bath that I was soaking my poison ivy in after just returning from 10 days in the Ozarks and do something about this. First things first, find Abraham's shelter. One of our VU members, Jeremy, opened up his home to him for as long as he needed. Plans to rebuild that road would ultimately evolve and is now complete. Then I immediately started coming up with a plan. That started with looking for fuel cans, so I wouldn't depend on the area I was headed into for fuel. as that was a commodity that was not to be found. I found exactly 0 fuel jugs in my area as my city too was hit and I had no power. Joshua Fisher found 10 5-gallon jugs and met me halfway to Atlanta to pass them off. You should have seen me trying to get those 10 jugs in my Land Cruiser. I threw 3 chainsaws, 6 cases of water, and some supplies to survive for a week in my Land Cruiser. Michelle and I stayed up till about 1 a.m. in the morning creating what later would become the volunteer forum. Established satellite donation drop-off locations and the wellness check form. During this time is when I saw comments online that said, "Don't go, you'll just be in the way. Don't go, you'll be a burden, and take the little supplies that are there for the people who need it." Also, I heard there was no access into Asheville, and it's very dangerous. All valid points to a degree, but I could not sit idly by. I didn't know for sure where I was going to stay, nor if I could even get there safely. I had Justin, my 30,000-foot eye-in-the-sky guy, find me a route in. He also was willing to post up at a gas station nearest ground zero and top off as many empties as I sent him. All this is going on while I'm on my way to Asheville. Ray, the gentleman I was going to check on initially, calls me and said his community cleared his street and he was out. Thank God. I then asked him to find me a place to camp. He said I could at the very least camp at his house. That's when I said, "How big is your yard?" Because I started to see our volunteer form fill up quickly. Nonetheless, he was going to go scout some areas for me. First, he had mentioned the KOA in Swannanoa, but then came back and said the KOA had been wiped out. He then talked to the owner of the Pisgah Brewery in Black Mountain, North Carolina, an old Asheville native by the name of David, and said, "Come on." I pulled up at the gate, was greeted with a handshake, and talked to him about what was about to happen. He opened up his home and heart and said, "Feel free to camp anywhere y'all like," and gave me access to all 3 of his warehouses. This was one of the first big blessings. Without this location, none of what we accomplished would have been possible. Day 1. Alex Jeffrey shows up and says, "How can I help?" He became my right-hand guy, and without him, all of this would have eaten me alive. I will always be grateful for that young man, and we will be friends for life. First thing we did was meet with the police chief, fire chief, and city manager of Black Mountain. We asked them, "How can we help?" They welcomed us with handshakes and briefed us on the situation. We informed them that we could get fuel and supplies if needed, and asked how we could help further. His team provided a GIS map to me and my team and asked that we clear and status the roads of Black Mountain, North Carolina. Approximately 6 rigs showed up on day 1. The mission was to simultaneously status the roads while doing well checks from the form that we created. By day 2, all roads in Black Mountain were cleared and statused with the help of our team working side by side with others in the community. I went to bed in the RTT that night and could feel that something astonishing was about to kick off. Day 2. Many more volunteers show up to continue wellness checks, each bringing tons of equipment and supplies. Everything from heavy equipment like mini excavators, skid steers, and chainsaws were beginning to show up on base. This day was when we began to create phase 1 of how we ran mission control. Pick a name off the ever-growing wellness check form, used that as an opportunity to scout the roads, record routes, and while at any location or area was an opportunity to gather intel on what else was needed in the area. The 2-rig team would return with that knowledge to resupply and return, if needed, to the area. Sometimes this was at a fire station, a distribution center, a neighbor, a street, or a church. Night 2, I stayed in my good friend Micah's camper on a love seat that was way too small. I slept very little as my mind continued to race. Little did I know this camper would become my home for the next few weeks. I will always be grateful for Micah loaning me this beast of a motorhome. The hot shower at night and coffee in the morning was the only thing keeping me moving forward. Day 3. Still under a little pop-up canopy with a single table, one single pad of paper, we continued to run wellness checks. On this day, 3 semi-trucks showed up full of supplies. One was slapped full of Cheez-Its and will remain to be a joke for a while. Although still very grateful that it was there. The sheer amount of supplies that arrived in the next few days was staggering. By this day, we probably had close to 500 gallons of fuel on base, with a few hundred being diesel, all of which were being brought by volunteers in 5-gallon jugs. On day 3, there were approximately 50 people in camp running missions, including a team of folks who brought 6 horses. We all were running missions back to back and were doing so with decent efficiency. Those missions ranged from rebuilding washed out roads, wellness checks, distributing supplies in the front of Pisgah Brewery, cutting and clearing entire roads, and running supplies to the last mile. This was also the day that I hit a wall. I was so exhausted by now that it was very difficult for me to spell, to use my phone, or do anything really productive. I think by this time I may have had a half a hamburger, a taco, and some cheese sticks. This was also the day we started routinely having all hands meetings at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., which would continue for the next 25 days. These meetings were where you could really feel the VU spirit and knew you were surrounded by the very best people. We now 100% had a base and an operation. Many of the guys noticed that Alex and I were running on empty. A team of folks stepped up that night and came up with a logistics plan that would remove what Alex and I were doing with a pad of paper, a spreadsheet, and our phones. Instead, now we had full-on standard operation procedures. They stayed up all night creating this thing. I remember before I went to bed, I asked them on a scale 1 to 3 how successful this was going to be when 100 volunteers show up, and they all said a solid 2. I went to bed around 2 a.m. with my mind racing even louder than before. Day 4, the move from the canopy tent to the unfinished brewery tap room. Huge amounts of supplies continued to roll in. Everything from a 500-gallon fuel truck, 250-gallon water cubes, 200-gallon diesel tank, portable showers, and life-saving medical supplies such as insulin and oxygen, some of which was being brought in via helicopters. There were times that I looked around and simply could not believe what had unfolded. All I really knew was we were there to make a small difference in the people's lives of Western North Carolina. When we had our all-hands meeting, we explained to the many volunteers that were standing there that we had created a new process, and there would be a 2-hour delay before starting this morning. By 10 a.m., the team jumped into their positions and began churning out missions even better than it ever had been. These positions were intake, intel, mission control, recon, mapping, warehouse, site coordinator, to name a few. We had created a machine. We stumbled, we fell, but we improved with every fall. Emergency Operations Center, EOC-1, was now a major command in WNC. Other organizations started to fly in, drop by, and ask to work together. We all had one mission: help make the people of this area not hurt so bad. Day 5, Friday. This is when I knew the weekend was going to be insane. I knew approximately 150 volunteers would be on site very soon. By this time, we were running 150 miles per hour. The needs would change by the moment. My phone would light up every 5 seconds. At one time, I think Alex was taking on approximately 300 calls per day. I was trying to maintain volunteer intake, donations, and was communicating with the coordinators that were not on base. There are stories that went on during this time that I will only share around the campfire. Some of the locals that I met and the stories they would tell would cause us both to hug and cry. I watched way too many grown, burly mountain men cry during our time at EOC 1. I still hurt for these folks. Day 6 and 7, the weekend. We simply just churned. By now, over 200 missions had been completed and many more flying in. We were loading pallets of supplies into trailers and beds of the rigs. This honestly was all a blur. This was also the day I was talking with some folks, turned, and saw Michelle for the first time in 5 days. I broke down and cried. I felt I had lived a lifetime since I left her only 5 days ago. I was thrilled to see her. Everywhere I looked, I saw Venture Unknown. I saw the spirit of people helping people more so than I ever had. Words will always fall short to the energy that flowed through this makeshift command center. Food being prepared and brought in from so many wonderful folks. Stacks of food would be delivered to the team. The amount of generosity was staggering. So many people gave their all, and I do mean all. Some folks at this point who were coming for a couple of days had now been here for almost a week. We spent these days continuing to make contacts with towns that were hit the most. Green Mountain, Red Hill, Bat Cave, Lake Lure, Ramsey Town, Chimney Rock, Swannanoa, and many more. We would run till we couldn't run anymore. It was also during this week where we began to see that we could possibly bottle up our processes into a program management software, which was a good thing because this brewery, which at one time was being run by 2 guys with a notebook, now had a half a dozen whiteboards, projector, 3 Starlinks, 1,000,000 Post-its, and index cards everywhere. Imagine a Post-it note factory exploding, and that was this EOC. So we were glad to try to digitize our processes. On Saturday, the reality of what had happened to the gentleman that owns the brewery started to sink in. He wasn't getting water to start operations for a while. He was stressed, and this is when I realized having 100 plus people running around in 3 of his warehouses stacked to the brim with supplies was becoming even more stress. After speaking with him on Saturday, I informed him we would stop missions on Sunday and be packed and mostly out by Monday. I frantically started to look for other buildings that could house our operations. This was not easy. Long story short, we found a contact who had a 150-acre farm up in Little Switzerland, North Carolina. It had a shop, a cottage with storage underneath, and a place for folks to camp. A helicopter picked myself and Alex and 4 other stinky men up, and we went to scout the farm. It was a beautiful piece of heaven, but also very limited to how many folks could be on it at any given time. Not to mention, there were about 3 ways in, none of which Google would lead you in safely. We spent 3 days trying to route safe passage in for the incoming volunteers. We had no other choice but to either end operations or pull the trigger on this location. That Sunday at the brewery, there was a full stop at 4 p.m. on all missions, and we began to pack up. What started with a single notepad was now 10 big bins of office supplies. By Tuesday morning, the Pisgah Brewery looked as if we were never there. Several truckloads of donations were sent to a local warehouse to be distributed to the folks throughout the winter. We then hugged our old friends in Black Mountain and began EOC 2 up in Little Switzerland, North Carolina. Week 2 and 3. We landed at the farm and within a few days had connexes, porta potties, a full shower trailer show up. This all helped the limiting logistics of the farm, and the showers certainly boosted morale. We spent running very focused missions. Our primaries were warmth, medical, elderly, children, and infrastructure. In a few days, we had packed out special kits for folks that may be running into a community and do wellness checks. These kits would have sleeping bags, heaters, hand warmers, water filtration, medical first aid, fuel, surge protectors, propane, and sometimes generators. The first few days spent here were very cold. We only could imagine the families that were displaced, without power, or living in tents. We were all grateful that in the 30 days we were in North Carolina, it never rained once. It sleeted one morning, but that was it. I feel God was giving the region a little break. This farm made us all feel a little guilty at times because it was so stunningly beautiful. It did not make us forget the folks that still were living in hell, though. Luckily, this part of the operation also slowed things down for the team because God knows we were killing ourselves in week 1. I can remember looking over at one of the team members and he was physically shaky from the nonstop stress. So this farm gave us a way to step back a little and regain our mental health. It was also during this time we began to truly develop our disaster relief software, which would later become a lifesaver. Mission control at EOC 1 would take approximately 20 people, including warehouse, volunteer coordinators, and logistics to run. Now we were running it with about 6. It was also this time that the leadership team would gather around a fire to discuss the future of whether or not we would try to continue this type of organization into other disasters. A fire had been lit under us to take everything we had gathered and do something with it. We all overwhelmingly said yes. We all believe that with hard work and dedication, a 501c3 disaster relief organization will grow out of what we've learned. This inspiration is now in the back of our minds, but honestly, we had little time to discuss it because we all still needed to be present as we were still running approximately 10 or 15 missions a day. Some of those missions were building a footbridge so folks that were traversing a creek to get supplies into their community. We built an emergency bridge so 10 families could get their cars free and now could be self-reliant getting supplies. One of my favorite pictures is one of the teams returning to an elderly woman with a birthday cake after learning it was her 81st birthday. Every day we would meet for our all hands during sunrise at the meeting tree, and every night we would meet back at the up to debrief while the sun went down. These days will be remembered by number 1, our wonderful host, Dan. Also, we will remember meeting the most amazing mountain folks and the feeling we kept a few of them warm. The stories we all could tell, but in some ironic way, as I sit here writing, we acknowledge it's not about the stories. It's about doing. It's about finding a way to help in any capacity you may be able to. One thing to note, during this time, we all acted like compassionate human beings. We did not hate one another for being one side and not the other. We simply loved. No illusions here that we still have a lot to learn on this subject, and quit listening to the noise and begin listening with your heart. Week 4. Our time on the farm was needing to come to an end. This was for many reasons I won't share here, but one of the main reasons is that myself and others have simply given a lot of time away from our homes that could have begun to cause issues. You can't help others if your cup is full. I personally needed to go refill my cup. In my all hands meetings, I would consistently remind our team to please blaze their own path and find a way to help a family, a community, or a church. That honestly takes going into these areas and asking, how can I help? What do y'all need? You don't need a group necessarily to do some good. Yes, it helps to organize and band together, but we all have the power to make a difference. So the final few days of being on base, almost the entirety of my stay there, I began to venture into these hard-hit areas. In doing so, I indeed found needs, and since then, with the help of VU and VUF donations, have been sending fuel, firewood, and supplies to this area, even as today, as early as today. Departing EOC2. Final 2 missions were run October 26th, and I personally departed October 27th, almost 1 month since my arrival to North Carolina. I plan to return to WNC and find my place in it again in the near future. Many from our team are still there and doing the same. I see it every day, and it makes me so proud to see the hard work and dedication of these folks. I know when driving around the main roads, we may feel disconnected from the areas that were truly devastated by this storm. But I can assure you, if you travel down to any river, town, or neighborhood that is near a creek, you will be made aware things are not okay. There are areas that won't get power for a while. There are homes that will never be rebuilt. Right now, there are projects about to kick off building tiny homes for folks. Mold remediation is needed to help save people's homes. Elderly that will never be able to have the strength or the money to clear huge trees are waiting on help. Oh, and Abraham's road that kick-started this whole thing now has been graded with a culvert and is all fixed with the help of donations and good friends. He's back home with his pets, wife, and is like a lot of people striving to get back to normal. What does the future hold? Since being home, my phone has finally started to go back to 75 miles per hour instead of 150. I began to rest, but my dreams are full of replaying the last month. Some of us have sought a little therapy in one form or the other, which we encourage. One therapist has opened her door free of charge to our team. All of us continue to remind each other we are here for one another. This was simply the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And honestly, I wasn't in the field near as much as some of the hundreds of volunteers that came through our outpost. So where does this leave us? Well, the leadership team is beginning to find quality time to talk and gather a plan for the future. We did indeed create disaster relief logistics program that would be an amazing tool for the unforeseen next time. We all are seeking NIMS training and figuring out what our organization will look like. There's a meeting in November with a lawyer to take on creating our 501c3 and is doing so pro bono if we do choose to go down this path. We also started a GoFundMe to help purchase a mobile command center. This tool would be extremely useful for future missions. We feel with what we've learned through our experiences with Hurricane Helene that we may be of some use to our fellow communities in the future if they found themselves affected by a disaster. We will see. It will be up to each of us to keep the spirit alive. I'll leave you with this. You matter. You are more powerful than you will ever give yourself credit for. You can create great change by following your heart and your intuition. If your heart tells you to do something, have faith. That's it. It know that it's not lying to you. Yes, you have to go about it logically, but don't stop there. Find the yes. Know that every interaction you have has a purpose and is significant. With the right eyes, you can see the way, and if your intentions are pure, then a way will open. I witnessed nothing short of miracles during this. I watched them spark instantly. Blessings were given to us because we were acting selflessly. People were genuine because we weren't trying to one-up one another. We simply bonded for one purpose, and that purpose was love for the fellow man. I want to thank so many of you that gave up space in your home for the tons of donations that rolled in, and the generosity of those that gave financially to this effort. Special thanks to those that left their homes and families to volunteer in the wake of this disaster. We could not have done it without y'all's determination and sacrifice. I'd like to also point out the only way I was able to do this and stay in WNC for a month was due to the Venture Unknown Patreons, and more importantly, my supporting wife. Without those two things, I would never have been able to be present for this operation. Thank you all who support the VU Patreon. There were two principles that we echoed at every meeting, and I believe embody the Venture Unknown spirit: kindness and compassion. Much love, Sean. So that's my letter. That's my story. I hope that you guys enjoyed it and maybe learned something from it. I'll leave you with a couple things that there are still ways to help in the area, not just North Carolina, but Georgia, some parts of North Carolina. There's definitely some opportunities that people are still needing. I encourage you guys to reach out to some of the organizations, the trusted organizations, and if nothing else, like I said, ride into these areas and go check on people. Ask them how they're doing, shake their hand, offer them a shower. And I know that sounds weird, but we did come across a gentleman that did take us up on a shower. He had not taken one in 2 weeks. His name is Mel, a wonderful couple that we met down on 19W. So I hope you guys enjoyed the time with me. I appreciate you tuning in. If you think about it, join Venture Unknown, join Venture Unknown Foundation, and we would like to have you around. It's a pretty good community. With that, I love you guys. Take care, and I'll check you later.